Poor little girl begs the young billionaire. I don't have any friends. Can you come to my birthday? What happens next is unbelievable. Callum Reeve touched the white wall of his apartment, flawless like everything around him. The glass award gleamed on the shelf, reflecting the light streaming in through the large windows. Excellence in architectural design, the engraving read. The third one he'd won in 5 years. No one to call, no one to tell. He picked up his coffee and walked to the balcony. Down below, the city moved at its frantic pace. People hugging, couples holding hands, families with children. An anthill of connections he observed from a distance, like a scientist studying a species he wasn't part of. His phone vibrated. It was Claire, his assistant. Mr. Reeve, the investors loved the Cultural Center project. They want to schedule a dinner to celebrate. His fingers hovered over the screen for a few seconds. Tell them I'm busy. Send the revised blueprints by tomorrow. He dropped the phone on the glass table and returned to his drafting board. The model for the new project, a luxury residential complex, was almost finished. Every detail perfectly calculated, every line exactly where it should be. Order, control, precision. People admired his work, praised his talent, paid fortunes for his creations. They said he had a gift for creating spaces that made people feel at home. Ironic, Callum thought, since he himself had never known what that was. He looked at the photo tucked away in his desk drawer, the only personal item in the entire apartment. A younger him smiling next to a woman with dark hair and intense eyes, Rebecca. 8 years since she left, taking half the money they had saved together and leaving a 3-line note. I found someone. I always knew you loved your projects more than me. Be happy. Before her, there was Michael, his former partner, who sold his designs to a rival construction company. And before Michael, his parents, who never understood why he preferred drawing to playing soccer, who never showed up to his graduations, who never said they were proud. Callum poured himself a whiskey. The amber liquid burned his throat as he watched the sunset through the panoramic window, the kind of view his clients would pay millions for. The city glittered with artificial lights, like an upside-down starry sky. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He ignored it. Silence reigned in the apartment once more. A silence he had designed himself, with soundproof walls and double-paned windows. A silence that once felt like protection, but was now just a constant echo of his own breathing. He returned to the drafting board and picked up his pencil, his refuge. When he drew, the world made sense. The lines obeyed. The spaces had purpose. Everything worked according to plan. On the corner of the table, the folder with the contracts for the new project, a condominium of family homes. Spaces that create memories, read the slogan the marketing team had created. Callum smiled ironically. What did he know about creating memories? He stood up and walked through the apartment. 800 square feet of aesthetic perfection, awards on the shelf, designer furniture, the kitchen he rarely used, the bedroom where he slept but never dreamed. In the bathroom, he faced his reflection in the mirror. Well-cut brown hair, tired green eyes, a defined jaw, a look that had once attracted glances, smiles, invitations. All declined in recent years. Back in the living room, he looked at the city through the glass. So many lives happening down there, so many stories being written, while his seemed frozen in a timeless present without connections. His projects were admired, copied, studied in universities. He created spaces for people to live, love, raise children, celebrate birthdays, plant gardens. Meanwhile, his own space remained like a museum exhibit, beautiful to look at, impossible to touch, perfect and empty. On the coffee table, the architecture magazine with his face on the cover. Callum Reeve, the man who redesigns the skyline. The interview talked about vision, innovation, the future. Not a single question about what he did when he wasn't working. No curiosity about who Callum Reeve was beyond the architect. He returned to the drafting board. He began to draw new lines, gentle curves that transformed into walls, windows, doors. A home for someone, a space where a family would grow, where children would run down the hallway, Where there would be laughter at breakfast and late-night conversations, Callum Reeve designed life for others. Callum Reeve was walking through downtown on a Thursday afternoon, leaving the office after a tiring meeting. He had just turned down the third dinner invitation from clients that week. The sky was clear, but he barely noticed. His thoughts remained stuck on the blueprints for the new residential project, on the angles that needed adjusting, on the meetings still ahead. The streets were crowded, people rushing home, mothers holding children's hands, street vendors selling food. A constant flow of lives crossing paths without truly meeting. Callum moved through them like someone crossing a river, dodging obstacles without getting his feet wet. The city noise, horns, conversations, music escaping from shops, formed a sound barrier he had learned to ignore. He was good at ignoring things. Years of practice had given him that skill. He stopped in front of a bookstore window. New architecture titles were on display. He thought about going in, maybe buying something for his already extensive collection. Books he read alone in his silent apartment. That's when he felt a gentle tug on the sleeve of his coat. He looked down and saw a little girl. She had big dark eyes that stared at him with a disconcerting intensity. Curly brown hair, partially tamed by colorful barrettes. She wore a simple blue dress, a little too big, as if waiting for her to grow into it properly. "Mister, can you come to my birthday? I don't have any friends." Her voice was low but clear. No self-pity, no emotional manipulation, just a raw sincerity that caught him completely off guard. Callum was paralyzed for a moment, as if he had forgotten how to answer a simple question. He looked around, expecting to see an adult coming to get the child eye, maybe to scold her for talking to strangers. But no one seemed to be paying them any attention, as if the two of them were in an invisible bubble in the middle of the busy sidewalk. "Your birthday?" he finally asked, feeling strangely unprepared. The girl nodded and held out a piece of paper folded several times. "It's on Saturday. There's going to be cake." Callum took the paper automatically. It was a handmade invitation with crayon in vibrant colors. Drawings of balloons, stars, and what looked like a cake filled the edges of the sheet. In the center, in large, uneven letters, it said, "Junie's birthday, 5 years old." Below, an address was written in an adult's hand. "Junie. Is that your name?" he asked, holding the colorful paper as if it was something fragile. The girl nodded, her curls bouncing. "It's Juniper, but everyone calls me Junie." She kept her eyes fixed on him, waiting. "Are you coming?" Before Callum could form a response, a female voice called out, a mix of concern and disapproval. "Junie, how many times do I have to tell you not to talk to strangers?" A young woman approached quickly, her gaze shifting between Callum and the girl. She looked to be in her late 20s, with features that made it clear she was Junie's mother. Brown hair tied in a makeshift bun, a few strands escaping around her face. Tired but kind eyes. Simple, worn clothes, but impeccably clean. "I'm sorry," she said to Callum, taking the girl's hand. "I hope she wasn't bothering you, sir." "Mom, I just gave him the invitation," Junie protested, without letting go of her mother's hand. The woman noticed the paper in Callum's hand and her cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, she's been inviting everyone to her birthday. Because I want to have friends," Junie explained with the direct, relentless logic typical of children. The mother smiled, a tired and embarrassed smile. "You don't have to worry about it. She's just being a kid." Callum looked at the invitation in his hand, then at the girl. There was something in those big eyes that bothered him deeply. A genuine hope, a sincerity he was no longer used to seeing in the adult world, where everything had ulterior motives. "I'm Eliza," the woman introduced herself, extending her free hand. "And this is my daughter, Junie, who is apparently very excited about her birthday." "Callum," he replied, shaking her hand briefly. "Callum Reeve." "Well, it was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reeve. Come on, Junie, we have to catch the bus." Junie waved at Callum as she was gently pulled away by her mother. "I hope you come. There's gonna be chocolate cake." As the two of them disappeared into the crowd, Callum remained standing, looking at the invitation in his hand. The paper was thin, the cheapest kind you could buy at any stationery store. The drawings were simple, without technique, but with the pure enthusiasm that only a child can convey. Something about that piece of paper bothered him deeply. He was about to toss it in the first trash can he saw when, for some reason he couldn't explain to himself, he folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. For the next 2 days, Callum tried to forget the encounter. He dove into work with even more intensity. He reviewed blueprints, led meetings, discussed materials with suppliers. He maintained his perfect, controlled routine, but somehow the colorful invitation remained in his mind, like a dissonant note in a harmonious symphony. On Friday night, as he was hanging up his coat, he found the invitation while emptying his pockets. He stared at the crumpled paper for long minutes, as if trying to decipher a secret code. He remembered Junie's big eyes, the absolute sincerity in her voice when she said she had no friends. He sat in the leather armchair of his elegant, silent apartment. Through the large windows, he could see the city glittering below, indifferent and distant. He looked back at the invitation in his hands, a piece of colored paper that seemed completely out of place in his monochromatic world. Ridiculous, he muttered to himself. Completely ridiculous. He put the invitation in the coffee table drawer and went to bed. But the next morning, the invitation was in his hands again. And on Saturday afternoon, against all common sense, Callum found himself driving his imported car down a narrow street in the suburbs, following the address scribbled on the invitation. He parked in front of a small house with peeling paint on the walls and a modest but well-tended garden. A few hardy flowers grew in makeshift beds. The mailbox was crooked, propped up on a stand that clearly needed repairs. He stayed in the car for several minutes, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, wondering what on earth he was doing there. He had stopped at a store on the way and bought a gift, a good quality sketchbook and a set of professional colored pencils. A practical gift, he thought. Nothing extravagant that might cause embarrassment, but also not something cheap that would seem dismissive. He checked the address one more time. He looked at his watch. He still had time to go home, pretend he was never there. No one would know. A 5-year-old would soon forget a stranger who promised to show up and didn't. But those big, sincere eyes came to his mind again. Finally, he gathered his courage and got out of the car. The wrapped gift felt heavy in his hands as he walked to the rusty gate. He hesitated for a moment, almost went back to the car, but then he pushed the gate, which creaked in protest, and went in. He followed a narrow path alongside the house, as instructed on the invitation. The backyard was small, with a dirt floor and a few potted plants. Some colorful balloons were tied with tape to the worn wooden fence. A simple table covered with a floral patterned cloth had a homemade chocolate cake in the center and some colorful plastic cups arranged around it. There were no other guests, just Eliza arranging the table and Junie sitting on a wooden stool, drawing intently in a notebook with pages already yellowed by time. Callum cleared his throat lightly to announce his presence. They both looked in his direction simultaneously. Junie's face lit up with a smile so genuine, so full of pure joy, that Callum felt something move inside his chest, like a rusty gear suddenly starting to work again. "You came," she exclaimed, jumping off the stool and running to him, her small feet kicking up dust from the dirt floor. Eliza seemed genuinely surprised, almost shocked to see him there. "Mr. Reeve, we didn't really expect you to come. I mean, Junie invited a lot of people, but Callum, please," he corrected, feeling uncomfortably formal. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Interrupting?" Eliza smiled, a tired but genuinely warm smile. "You're the only guest who showed up." There was a dignity in the way she said it, without self-pity, just stating a fact. Callum felt a pang of something he couldn't immediately identify, maybe respect. Junie took Callum's hand without any hesitation, her small fingers wrapping around his with complete trust. "Come see the cake my mom made. It's chocolate, my favorite." Callum let himself be led by the small hand. The feeling was strange. How long had it been since someone had touched him like that, so naturally? Without expectations, without ulterior motives, just pure and simple human contact. "I brought a gift," he said, holding out the simply wrapped package when they reached the table. Junie's eyes widened, as if he had announced he'd brought the moon. "A gift? For me?" "It's your birthday, isn't it?" Callum tried to smile, a gesture that felt rusty from disuse. Junie took the package with reverence, as if it were something infinitely precious. Her small fingers unwrapped it carefully, trying not to tear the paper. When she finally revealed the sketchbook and the set of colored pencils, her face lit up with a wonder so genuine that it made Callum feel something inside him melt, like ice exposed to the sun for the first time after a long winter. "Look, Mom, colored pencils, so many. And a new notebook that doesn't even have creases in the pages." Eliza looked at Callum with genuine gratitude in her eyes. "That was very kind of you. Thank you so much." There was a deeper thanks in her look, a silent acknowledgement of a gesture that went beyond the material value of the gift. Callum nodded slightly, uncomfortable with the gratitude he didn't feel he deserved. Junie was already opening the case, admiring each pencil as if they were rare treasures. Her small fingers ran over the sharp points carefully. Then, she looked at Callum with those big, sincere eyes that seemed to see through all the layers of protection he had built over the years. "Do you want to draw with me?" The question caught Callum off guard. How long had it been since he had drawn just for fun, without structural calculations, without budget concerns, without demanding clients expecting perfect results? Just lines on paper, colors mixing, the pure joy of creating. Yes, why not? And so Callum Reeve, the renowned architect whose projects were worth millions, whose creations appeared in international architecture magazines, found himself sitting on the dirt floor next to a 5-year-old girl, drawing with colored pencils in a new notebook. Junie drew with the unbridled enthusiasm typical of children: a big house with a smoking chimney, a smiling sun with vibrant yellow rays, colorful flowers in the garden, and 3 stick figures holding hands in front of the house. "This is my mom," she explained, pointing to one of the figures. "This is me, and this is you." Callum looked at the simple drawing. Him, Junie, and Eliza, holding hands, smiling, in front of a house that didn't exist in reality, but on paper looked more alive and welcoming than any project he had ever designed. "It's a beautiful drawing," he said, surprised by the sincerity he found in his own voice. Meanwhile, Eliza watched them discreetly as she finished making tea and setting up the cake. There was something in her eyes as she looked at the scene, not just gratitude, but a gentle curiosity, as if she too were trying to understand what had brought this obviously successful man to her daughter's birthday party. There, in that modest backyard, with the smell of chocolate cake in the air and the sound of Junie's crystal-clear laughter, Callum felt something awaken inside him, something that had been dormant for so long he had almost forgotten its existence. He couldn't name exactly what it was, but it felt as if a knot inside him was slowly, very slowly, starting to unravel. As the sun began to set, they sang "Happy Birthday," ate cake, and drank tea from colorful plastic cups. Junie blew out the candle with so much enthusiasm that she splattered wax all over the chocolate frosting, making everyone laugh. And for the first time in a long time, Callum Reeve laughed. A genuine laugh that had nothing to do with social courtesy or convention. A laugh that came from some forgotten place inside him, a place that had been sealed off by disappointments and betrayals, but that apparently still existed. And when he finally said goodbye, as the sky was darkening, promising Junie she could show him her drawings when she finished filling the notebook, he realized something had changed. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself, but he knew that impossible invitation, delivered by small hands on a busy sidewalk, had opened a door he thought was permanently closed. 3 days passed. Callum was in his office, reviewing blueprints for a new commercial building, when he realized his mind was wandering to the dirt backyard and the sincere smile of a 5-year-old girl. He stopped drawing and looked out the window. The sky was gray, threatening rain. His fingers drummed on the desk, restless. There was something unfinished about that visit, something calling him back. He opened a drawer and took out a piece of paper. It was nothing important, just a note about measurements he had taken during the morning meeting, but it could serve as an excuse. Callum grabbed his car keys and left work early for the first time in years. Before heading to the suburbs, he stopped at a stationery store and bought another sketchbook. This one had a hardcover, better quality paper, a notebook that would last longer. When he parked in front of the small house with peeling paint, he felt a knot in his stomach. What was he doing here? What excuse would he give? Would it seem strange, intrusive? He took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The rain was starting to fall in fine droplets as he knocked on the door, the new notebook and the forgotten paper in his hands. Eliza opened the door, wearing a waitress uniform. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized him. Mr. Reeve. Callum. What a surprise. I hope I'm not bothering you, he said, suddenly feeling out of place. I realized I left a paper here on Saturday. I thought I should return it. A weak excuse. They both knew it. But Eliza smiled, a smile that said she understood more than he was willing to admit. Of course. Come in, please. Junie is drawing in the living room. I was just getting ready for work. Callum stepped inside. The house was small on the inside, but impeccably clean. The furniture was simple, some of it visibly second-hand, but there was an evident care in every detail. On the walls, children's drawings were taped up, creating a colorful and sincere gallery. Junie was on the living room floor, lying on her stomach, drawing intently in the notebook he had given her. Hearing footsteps, she lifted her head, her face lit up instantly. "Mason Cal," she exclaimed, jumping to her feet and running to him. Without hesitation, she hugged his legs. The gesture caught Callum off guard. He wasn't used to hugs, especially from children. He felt a strange warmth in his chest. "Hello, Junie," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I see you're using the notebook. I'm drawing every day. To want to see." Before he could answer, she was already pulling his hand, guiding him to the floor where she was drawing. Callum sat down, feeling awkward in his expensive suit on the worn living room rug. Junie showed him her drawings with pride. There were colorful houses, huge flowers, people holding hands. On every page, a new world created by imperfect lines and vibrant colors. "You're very talented," Callum said sincerely. Eliza watched them from the doorway, adjusting the name tag on her uniform. "I have to go for the night shift. Mrs. Patton from across the street will be here to stay with Junie in 15 minutes. Callum suddenly felt like an intruder. "I should go too. I just came to return this and—" He held out the new notebook. "I thought you might be able to use another one." Junie took the new notebook with reverence. "It's so pretty." "Thank you, Cal." Eliza hesitated. "You don't have to leave now if you don't mind waiting until Mrs. Patton gets here. Junie is clearly happy to have you." The suggestion surprised him. There was trust in that offer, a trust he wasn't sure he deserved. "It wouldn't be a problem?" he asked. "Not at all," Eliza smiled. "In fact, it would be a relief to know she's not alone for even a minute." So, Callum found himself sitting on the floor of the small living room, drawing with Junie as Eliza left for work. The rain was now beating against the windows with more force, creating a bubble of intimacy inside the house. Junie looked at him with curiosity as he drew lines on the paper. "Are you an architect?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised him. "I am. How do you know that?" Junie shrugged. "You draw differently. You make straight lines without a ruler." Callum smiled. "Yes, I'm an architect. I design and build houses." Junie's eyes lit up. "Houses with flowers out front?" There was something in the simplicity of that question that touched him deeply. In all his award-winning projects, in all his meetings with wealthy clients, no one had ever asked about flowers. "Only the best ones," he answered seriously. Junie nodded, as if that were the wisest answer she had ever heard. "I think houses need flowers. And also big windows for the sun to come in." "I completely agree. Our house doesn't have flowers," she continued, drawing as she spoke. "But it has windows. My mum says one day we'll have a real garden." Callum heard the simple dream in her voice and felt something tighten in his chest. How many luxury homes had he designed, with elaborate gardens that their owners barely noticed? The conversation flowed naturally as they drew. Junie told him about her school, one she had visited but didn't attend yet. She talked about her favorite TV show, about how she liked to draw clouds, about how her mother told her stories every night before bed. Callum listened, asking occasional questions, noticing how each of her answers was direct and honest. No filters, no ulterior motives, just pure truth. something that had become rare in his world of business and appearances. When Mrs. Patton arrived, an elderly woman with a kind smile, Callum realized he had spent almost an hour drawing and talking with Junie. Time he hadn't even felt pass. "Are you coming back?" Junie asked as he got up to leave. The question was simple, but loaded with expectation. Callum realized he no longer needed excuses. "Yes, I'll be back," he replied with a certainty that surprised him. On the way home, driving through the now heavy rain, Callum thought about the afternoon he had spent. There was something liberating about sitting on the floor and drawing houses with flowers and big windows. Something real and true that he hadn't experienced in a long time. He realized he hadn't gone there to return any paper. He had gone because he missed it, a word he hadn't used in years. He missed Junie, her sincere smile and direct questions. He even missed Eliza, with her tired but kind eyes, her quiet dignity. Upon arriving at his luxurious, empty apartment, Callum found one of Junie's drawings in his pocket. She had carefully folded it and given it to him before he left. It was a simple house, with flowers out front and 3 smiling figures holding hands. He stuck the drawing on the refrigerator with a magnet, the only color in his monochromatic apartment. For the first time in years, the silence of the apartment didn't feel comfortable. It just felt empty. Callum's visits became frequent over the following weeks, first once a week, then twice. Soon, he was stopping by whenever he had free time, something that surprised even himself. His calendar, once filled exclusively with professional meetings, now included moments reserved for visiting a small house in the suburbs. In the 3rd week, he brought a small shelf for Junie's books, which he installed on her bedroom wall. In the 4th week, he fixed the dripping kitchen faucet, small gestures, constant presence. That Wednesday, he arrived with a box of chocolate cookies. He parked the car and noticed that he already knew every detail. The wooden fence that needed paint, the small flower bed where Junie had planted sunflower seeds, the makeshift swing he himself had helped hang. Junie met him at the door before he even knocked, as if she had a radar for his arrival. She jumped for joy, her curls bouncing with the movement. "Cal, come see my new drawing. I made a whole city." He followed her inside, now familiar with every corner of the small house. Junie's drawings covered more walls, like a colorful and personal wallpaper. The worn sofa had a new cushion sewn by Eliza with scraps of fabric. On the kitchen table, a vase with wildflowers that Junie had picked from the nearby vacant lot. Callum no longer felt out of place there. His expensive shoes and designer clothes seemed less and less important, less a part of who he really was. Eliza emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, a few strands escaping around her face. She looked tired. He knew she had worked a double shift at the diner, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "You're just in time for dinner," she said. "Nothing special, just spaghetti with sauce, but there's plenty." "I don't want to impose," Callum replied automatically, though he was secretly hoping for the invitation. The simple meals at that table meant more to him now than dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. "It's more of an imposition if you refuse," Eliza joked, already turning to get another plate. "Besides, Junie has been talking about your visit all day." As Junie spread her drawings across the table, a city with buildings, parks, and tiny people, Callum watched Eliza in the kitchen. There was a quiet strength about her, in her efficient movements, in the way she stretched simple ingredients to create a full meal. Nothing was wasted. Dinner was served, and the 3 of them sat at the table. Callum noticed how this ritual had become important to him, the simplicity of sharing a meal, the unpretentious conversations, the sense of belonging that was growing in his chest. Junie talked excitedly about the book Callum had brought the previous week, reciting entire passages. Eliza occasionally corrected a word here and there, showing that she too had read the story several times to her daughter. "You have a good memory," Callum commented, impressed. Junie smiled proudly. "My mum says I'm smart." "And it's true," Eliza confirmed, running a hand through her daughter's curls. There was pride in her voice, but also a shadow that Callum was beginning to recognize, the worry of a mother who fears she can't provide enough. After dinner, while Junie organized her drawings, Callum helped Eliza with the dishes, a ritual that had also become part of his visits. He washed, she dried. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind of silence that only exists when there's no need to fill it with words. Later, when Junie went to brush her teeth to get ready for bed, Callum and Eliza sat on the small front porch. The evening was pleasant, a few stars visible despite the city lights. Callum realized he no longer felt the urge to return to his empty apartment. "So she really likes you," Eliza said softly, looking at the sky. "She talks about you all the time." "I like her too," Callum replied sincerely. "She's special. She has a unique way of seeing the world." Eliza nodded, a soft smile touching her lips. "She's always been like that, from day one. Even as a baby, she had that look, like she was really seeing everything." Something in the way she said it, a mix of pride and concern, made Callum ask, "It must have been hard, in the beginning." It wasn't a direct question, but an invitation to share if she wanted to. Eliza was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I raised Junie on my own," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "Her father left before she was born." Callum didn't show surprise, just nodded, giving her space to continue. "I work at a diner. What I make pays for the basics, utilities, food." She looked at her own hands, calloused from hard work. There was dignity in the way she spoke. She wasn't complaining, just stating facts. "She's never been to school, but I promised one day she will." The last sentence carried so much weight, so much determination, that Callum felt something tighten in his chest. That wasn't just a vague hope. It was a promise Eliza was determined to keep, no matter what it cost. Callum listened in silence. He didn't offer empty platitudes, didn't express pity, didn't ask invasive questions. He simply listened, giving her the respect of receiving her story without judgment. "I teach her what I can at home," Eliza continued, her gaze now turned toward the inside of the house, where they could hear Junie humming. "Numbers, letters, stories. She learns fast, faster than I can teach her, actually." She smiled, a smile that mixed pride and a hint of sadness. "Sometimes I worry it's not enough, that she needs more than I can give. Better books, real teachers, things I can't provide right now." There was raw honesty in that confession, but not self-pity. Eliza wasn't casting herself as a victim or asking for help. She was simply stating a fact, like someone acknowledging the existence of a mountain they need to climb. "You give her the most important thing," Callum said after a moment. "Security, love, a real home." Eliza looked at him, a little surprised by the observation. "I grew up in a big house, with everything money could buy," Callum continued, surprising himself with the confidence, "and yet I never really felt at home. My parents were always too busy to notice I existed." It was Eliza's turn to listen in silence, without judgment. Her eyes, fixed on his, showed an understanding that went beyond words. "Our Junie is lucky to have you," he added. Eliza shook her head slightly. "It's not luck, it's a choice. Every day I choose to do the best I can with what I have." Those simple words hit Callum with unexpected force. Choice. All his professional successes, his luxurious apartment, his awards, none of it mattered if every day he chose loneliness over connection. Junie appeared at the door, already in her pajamas, a book in her hands. "Mom, story time." Eliza smiled, standing up. "Duty calls." "I should go," Callum said, also standing, though part of him wanted to stay. "You can stay for the story?" Junie asked, her big eyes full of hope. "It's about a bear who builds a house." Callum looked at Eliza, who shrugged with a smile. "You're welcome to stay." And so, Callum found himself sitting on the edge of Junie's small bed next to Eliza, listening to her read a story about a bear who found a home. Her voice changed for each character, her tired eyes still managing to convey the magic of the story to her daughter. Junie fell asleep before the end, her breathing becoming deep and regular. Eliza gently closed the book and tucked the blanket around her daughter. On the way to the door, Callum stopped, noticing the bills and receipts organized neatly on the kitchen table. A separate pile had school written on top, with a few bills and coins. A slow and steady saving, every penny saved with a purpose. Something changed inside him in that moment. It wasn't pity, it was admiration. And more than that, it was a strong desire to be present. Not as someone who comes from the outside to save, but as someone who walks alongside and who is part of the journey. Eliza walked him to the door. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot to Junie." "And to you?" Callum asked, surprising them both. Eliza smiled, a sincere smile that reached her eyes. "Son, it means a lot to me too." On the way home, Callum thought about Eliza's promise, a promise that must have hurt every month when the bills arrived, every time she saw other children going to school, every moment she realized Junie's potential. And yet, she kept the promise alive. Not with grand gestures, but with small daily actions, coins saved, lessons at home, books read, constant encouragement. As he entered his silent apartment, Callum knew something had changed. It was no longer just Junie who drew him back to that little house. It was also Eliza, with her quiet strength, her silent dignity, her unwavering determination. She wasn't a victim of circumstances. She was a warrior fighting a daily battle with the weapons she had. And somehow Callum wanted to be part of that fight, not to save her, but to be by her side, present, real, connected. 1 month turned into 2 and then into 3. Callum's visits became a natural part of the routine in that small house. Wednesdays and Saturdays were guaranteed. Sometimes he would show up on a Monday or Friday, bringing something he had found and thought of Junie, a book of short stories, a set of building blocks, a box of colored chalk for drawing on the sidewalk. The gate that once creaked now opened smoothly after Callum had fixed it one Sunday afternoon. The kitchen faucet no longer dripped. The makeshift shelves he installed in the living room housed Junie's books and drawings, organized by color as she preferred. That Saturday afternoon, Callum arrived earlier than usual. He brought a small toolbox and some wooden planks. He had noticed that the front step was giving way and decided to replace it before someone got hurt. When he knocked on the door, he heard Junie's quick footsteps running down the hall. "It's Cal," she shouted before even opening it. How did she always know it was him? The door opened, and there she was, her hair longer now, but still with the same rebellious curls and the smile that lit up her whole face. "I brought wood," Callum exclaimed, showing the material. "Are you going to build a house?" Junie asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Not exactly. I'm going to fix the front step. It's dangerous." "Can I help? Can I be your assistant?" How could he say no to those eyes? Of course. Every good architect needs a reliable assistant. Eliza appeared at the door, drying her hands on her apron. She looked less tired today, Callum observed. Maybe because it was her day off from the diner. "Always working when you come here," she said, with a welcoming smile. "You'll end up with no time to relax." "This is relaxing for me," Callum replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of his own words. It was true. The hours he spent in that simple house, fixing things, playing with Junie, talking with Eliza on the porch after the girl fell asleep, they were the most peaceful hours of his week. There were no expectations there, no need to impress, no masks. While Callum measured and cut the wood for the new step, Junie sat on the grass beside him, watching every movement intently. Eliza brought out homemade lemonade and sat on the porch, flipping through a recipe book she had gotten from a co-worker. "Why are you marking the wood twice?" Junie asked, pointing to the lines Callum was drawing with his pencil. "It's an important rule," he explained, happy for her genuine interest. "Measure twice, cut once. That way we don't make mistakes." Junie nodded, as if she had just received a great piece of wisdom. Like when Mommy measures the flour twice before making a cake. Exactly like that. As he worked, Callum realized he knew the sounds of that house. The specific creak of the hallway floorboard, the sound of the old refrigerator turning on, the wind in the leaves of the backyard tree. There was something deeply comforting in this familiarity. After finishing the step, Callum accepted the invitation for dinner. Junie insisted he sit in the place that everyone now considered his, the chair with a view of the small backyard. The meal was simple, as always, but tasty. Eliza had a talent for turning basic ingredients into something special. After dinner, Junie asked to play the board game Callum had brought the previous week. The three of them sat in the living room, on the worn but clean rug, moving colourful pieces around the board and laughing when someone had to go backspaces. There was a naturalness to those moments that Callum had never experienced before. No pressure, no need to check emails or answer phone calls, just the present moment, filled with laughter and small disputes over the game. When Junie lost for the second time, she pouted for exactly 30 seconds before asking for a rematch. Eliza shot a look at Callum, a silent communication that said, just one more round before bed. And he understood perfectly. That was what surprised him the most. This ability to communicate without words that had developed between them. A look, a gesture, and complex messages were transmitted and understood. After the last round, with Junie celebrating her triumphant victory, it was time for bed. As had become custom, Callum participated in the ritual. Eliza read the story. He did the characters, voices, and Junie listened enchanted, fighting the sleep that inevitably won. When Junie's breathing became rhythmic and deep, they quietly left the room. In the living room, Eliza made tea for both of them, another small tradition they had developed. "She falls asleep more easily when you're here," Eliza commented, passing him a mug. "I think she feels safer." Callum felt something warm in his chest. "She's a special kid." "Yes, she is," Eliza agreed. "And perceptive. Do you know what she told me last night?" "What?" "She said that when you're here, the house feels happier." Callum stopped with the mug in mid-air. Junie's words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. He felt something inside him open up, like a door that had been stuck for years. "Funny," he said after a moment. "I feel the same way." It was true. That small, simple house, with its imperfections and makeshift repairs, felt more alive, more real than his luxurious, sterile apartment had ever been. "You know," he continued, looking at his own hands, "I spent years designing houses for other people. Big, elaborate, and expensive houses. But when I finished a project, I never thought about what it would be like to live in them. It was just a job." Eliza listened attentively, without interrupting. "Now, for the first time, I've found a place I want to come back to." The words came out before he could filter them, but they were true. His apartment was just a place to sleep. This small house, with its walls that needed paint and its floor that creaked, had become the place that occupied his thoughts during the day. Eliza smiled, without embarrassment or surprise, as if she already knew. "You always have a place here," she said simply. Later, driving back to his apartment, Callum realized that something fundamental had changed within him. The man who prided himself on not needing anyone, who built walls instead of bridges, was slowly learning the language of connection. Every nail he hammered in that house, every story he read to Junie, every evening conversation with Eliza, they were bricks of a new kind of structure he was building, not made of concrete and glass, but of shared moments and silent promises. The lonely architect who had spent his life designing spaces for others was finally beginning to build something for himself. A we, instead of an I. When he got home, he didn't turn on the television as he used to do to fill the silence. He sat at his drafting board and began to draw, not a project for a client, but an idea that had been growing in his mind. A simple house, with a swing on the backyard tree and large windows to let in the light. A house made not to impress, but to shelter, to live in, to come back to. A house that started with people. "You've never shown me where you work," Junie said one Sunday afternoon as they drew together at the kitchen table. Her curious eyes stared at Callum with that disarming frankness that only children possess. The observation caught Callum by surprise. It was true. In all these months, he had become part of their world, but he had never invited them into his. "Would you like to visit my office?" he asked, the idea forming as he spoke. Junie's face lit up. "Can I really? Are there drawings of houses there?" "Lots of drawings, and models too." "What are models?" "They're tiny little houses we make before we build the big ones, to see how they'll look." Junie's eyes widened. "Like doll houses." "Something like that," Callum smiled. "Except no one lives in them." Eliza, who was putting away dishes, turned with a hesitant expression. Are you sure? We don't want to get in the way of your work. There was something more behind that hesitation, Callum realized. A concern that Junie didn't belong in that sleek, professional world. Tomorrow is Monday, but I can take her after hours. The office is quiet after 6. Junie's joy was contagious. She spent the rest of the afternoon asking questions about the office, about the people who worked there, about what the models looked like. The next day, Callum left his last meeting early, ignoring the surprised looks from his colleagues. Normally, he was always the last to leave. He drove to Eliza's house, where Junie was already waiting for him on the porch, wearing her favorite dress, her hair held back with colorful clips, a small backpack on her shoulders. "What's in the backpack?" Callum asked as she got in the car. "My pencils and my notebook, in case I get ideas for houses." Eliza approached the car window. "So you don't have to have dinner with us tonight. I know you're already leaving early because of us." "I'll miss your cooking," Callum replied with a smile. "But maybe we can bring something back for everyone on the way home." The drive to downtown was filled with Junie's excited voice, pointing at buildings and asking if Callum had designed them. He answered patiently, explaining the difference between architects and builders, between residential and commercial projects. When they arrived at the modern building where his office was located, Junie fell momentarily silent, looking up at the glass windows reflecting the sky. "It's so big," she whispered, holding Callum's hand tighter. In the mirrored elevator, she looked at her own multiplied reflection, fascinated. It looks like magic. The office was almost empty at that hour. Only Claire, his assistant, was still organizing some documents. She looked up in surprise when she saw Callum arrive with a child. "Claire, this is Junie." "Junie, this is Claire, who helps me keep everything organized." "Hi," Junie said, suddenly shy. Claire smiled, recovering from her surprise. "Hello, Junie. I've never seen Mr. Reeve bring such a special visitor before." "You can go home, Claire," Callum said. "I'm just going to show Junie the office." After Claire left, Callum led Junie through the large space, with its organized workstations, pristine drafting boards, and models protected by acrylic cases. The girl walked on her tiptoes, as if afraid of breaking something just by being there. "Is that your spot?" she asked, pointing to the largest desk, positioned near the panoramic window. "Yes, that's where I work." "It's nice," she said, touching the polished surface of the desk carefully. "But it looks a little sad." The observation hit Callum like a small shock. He looked around, seeing his office through her eyes. It was elegant, yes. Modern, certainly, but there was a cold, impersonal quality to the environment that he had never noticed before. "You don't have any of your drawings on the wall," Junie continued, observing the grey walls with abstract paintings. "Architects don't usually hang their projects on the walls," Callum explained, though the explanation sounded hollow even to himself. He took her to the model room, where prototypes of various projects were displayed in different stages of development. Junie's eyes widened in admiration. "They're real little houses," she exclaimed, carefully approaching a model of a residential condominium. "Look, you can see inside through the windows." "This is the most fun part of my job," Callum confessed. "I'm building these models. Can you teach me?" The request, made with such hope, melted something inside Callum. "Of course. How about we start one now?" Junie jumped with joy, while Callum gathered materials on a lower countertop. Cardstock, wooden sticks, colored paper, glue, scissors with rounded tips, small foam blocks. Simple tools, Minkas, but in the right hands, they could create miniature worlds. "What kind of house are we going to make?" Callum asked. Junie thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "A happy house, where people want to stay." The simplicity of the answer touched Callum. How many clients had asked for impressive, modern, luxurious houses, but never a happy house? Together, they began to cut and paste. Callum helped with the harder parts, but let Junie make the creative decisions. She wanted a house with a red roof, because it's a cheerful color. She wanted lots of windows, so the sun can come in and chase away the sadness, and she insisted on a swing in the yard for the children to play on. "This house is going to have big windows and a garden with daisies," she declared, as she glued small paper flowers around the structure. Sonnet will have whatever you want, Callum replied, surprised at how much he was enjoying the process. There were no concerns about budgets, deadlines, or client demands, just the pure joy of creating. As they worked, Junie told stories about the imaginary people who would live in that house, a family with 2 children and a dog. The dog's name was Popcorn, because he was small and white. The older boy liked to read books in the yard. The younger girl loved to draw, like her. Callum listened, fascinated by the richness of childhood imagination. For Junie, the model wasn't just a representation, it was a whole world full of life and stories. When the model was almost finished, Junie asked for a short break. She opened her backpack and took out her sketchbook and colored pencils. With her tongue between her teeth, focused, she began to draw. "What are you drawing?" Callum asked. "The people who are going to live in the house, because a house is only happy when there are people inside." Something in that simple statement made Callum think of his own empty apartment, an elegant structure, without a soul, a space, not a home. When Junie finished the drawing, she carefully cut out the small figures and asked for help gluing them onto the model. Her family of colorful stick figures, now inhabiting the house they had built together. "It's perfect," Callum said, genuinely impressed with the result. "Can we take it to show Mommy?" "Of course. In fact, you could keep it." Junie's eyes sparkled. "Really? Can I put it in my room?" "It's yours. You're the one who created it." "We created it," Junie corrected, with the simple wisdom of children. "It's our house." On the way back, with the model carefully settled on the back seat, Callum realized something important. That office that had always been exclusively his, that professional sanctuary he kept separate from any personal life, now bore Junie's mark. There were little bits of colored paper scattered on the floor, a glue smudge on the countertop, a drawing of hers that he had discreetly tucked into his drawer. Callum Reeve, the reserved architect who kept everyone at a distance, had opened not only the doors of his office, but also those of a much more intimate and protected space, his emotional world. And strangely, instead of feeling invaded, he felt more complete than ever. The rain beat softly against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the small house. It was a fall Saturday, the kind of day that invited you to stay inside, protected and warm. Callum had arrived early, bringing a new puzzle and hot chocolate for the 3 of them. Now, as Eliza prepared lunch in the kitchen, Callum and Junie were sitting on the living room rug drawing. The model they had made together occupied a place of honor on the shelf, carefully positioned for everyone to admire. Callum noticed that Junie was quieter than usual. Her drawings, usually full of vibrant colors and cheerful shapes, seemed more subdued today. She had started several and abandoned them, which was unusual for her. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. Junie continued drawing for a moment, as if she hadn't heard. Then, without warning, she put down her pencil and looked at Callum with those eyes that seemed to see far beyond her 5 years. "I never met my dad," she said, her voice small but clear. Callum felt the air get caught in his lungs. Of all the things he expected to hear, this wasn't on the list. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, giving her space to continue. "Mommy said he left before I was born," Junie continued, now looking at her unfinished drawing. She traced a line she had made with her finger. "I say I don't care, but I miss him." The simplicity of the confession hit Callum like a punch to the gut. How can you miss someone you've never met? And yet, here was this child, articulating an absence that had shaped her entire short life. In the kitchen, without them noticing, Eliza had stopped chopping vegetables. She was standing still, the knife motionless on the cutting board, listening to the conversation. Her face reflected an old pain, a wound that had never fully healed. Callum took a deep breath, searching for the right words. There were no right words, he realized, only honest ones. "I don't know how to be a dad," he finally replied, calmly and sincerely. "But I know I really like being with you." Junie looked at him, her big eyes searching for something in Callum's face. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she smiled slightly and picked up her pencil again. "You draw with me, and you fix things, and you tell stories," she said, as if listing important qualities. "And that's what dads do, right? The question, so innocent and yet so loaded, left Callum speechless for a moment. "Some dads do those things, yes," he finally replied. "But being a dad is more than that." "What else?" Callum thought of his own father, always absent, always too busy to notice his drawings, his school achievements, his dreams. "A dad should always be there," he said, knowing it was a simplification but feeling the truth behind the words. Not just when it's convenient or easy. He should be there on the good days and the bad. Junie considered this for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Like you are?" The question caught him off guard. "I try to be," he replied, feeling the weight of those simple words. Junie smiled, apparently satisfied with the answer, and went back to drawing, now with more energy, the colors returning to her strokes. Callum noticed she was drawing 3 figures holding hands. In the kitchen, Eliza discreetly wiped away a tear with the back of her hand and went back to preparing lunch, her movements more deliberate than before. The rest of the afternoon passed normally. They had lunch together, worked on the new puzzle, laughed at the stories Junie made up about each piece they fit together. But Callum felt a subtle shift in the air, as if a new layer of meaning had been added to his presence there. When it was time for Junie to take a bath before dinner, Eliza called Callum to the front porch. The sky was beginning to darken, and the rain had given way to a soft mist that hung over the houses. They stood in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Eliza spoke, her voice calm but filled with restrained emotion. "She's getting very attached to you." It wasn't an accusation, but there was a clear concern in her words. "I know," Callum replied simply. The silence returned, filled only by the distant sound of a passing car and the noise of Junie's bathwater. "I'm afraid you'll leave," Eliza continued finally, looking at the street partially lit by the lampposts, "and that she'll feel that absence again." There was so much vulnerability in that confession that Callum felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just about Junie, he realized. It was also about Eliza, about her own losses and abandonments. "I'm not going anywhere, Eliza," he said with a conviction that surprised them both. "I don't plan on leaving." Eliza turned to look at him directly, her eyes searching for the truth behind the words. "People say that," she replied softly. "And then life happens. A better job in another city, a new relationship, other priorities." Callum understood what she wasn't saying. How many promises had already been broken in her life? How many times had she heard, "I'm not leaving," only to see someone's back walking away? "I can't promise that nothing will change," Callum said, choosing his words carefully. "No one can. But I can promise that I won't just disappear. That any change, any decision will take both of you into consideration." He paused, searching for the words to express something that was still forming in his own heart. "You've become important to me, more than I expected, more than I thought was possible." Eliza didn't answer immediately. Her gaze returned to the street, but Callum noticed that her shoulders seemed less tense. "She asked you about Dad's today," she said finally. "Yes." "What you answered was perfect," Eliza admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "Honest, without promising what you can't deliver." From inside the house, they heard Junie's voice calling for Eliza. The bath was over. "I'm coming," Eliza replied, and then turned to Callum one last time before going inside. "Thank you for being here, for being consistent." The word hung between them like a compliment, an acknowledgement, perhaps even a challenge. Later, after Junie had fallen asleep and Callum was getting ready to go, he found the drawing she had made earlier, carefully left on the coffee table, 3 figures holding hands in front of a colorful house. Underneath, in uneven but determined handwriting, she had written, "My family." Callum felt something break and rebuild inside him at the same instant. A silent but profound transformation, like a river slowly but surely changing its course. When Eliza walked him to the door, there was a new understanding between them, an understanding that went beyond words, an unspoken but no less real promise. "See you Wednesday?" she asked, as she always did. "See you Wednesday?" he confirmed. But they both knew it wasn't just about the next meeting. It was about all the days that would come after. about building something lasting in a world where so many things are temporary. It was about being the presence that never leaves. Monday arrived with the typical fast pace of the office. Callum spent the morning in meetings, reviewing projects, adjusting budgets. His professional routine remained the same, but he had changed. He felt it in the small details. In the photo of Junie he now kept discreetly in his drawer. In her drawing, he had taped to the inside wall of his office. In the unfinished model, the two of them had started together, now on his side table. Shortly after lunch, Claire knocked on the door. "Mr. Reeve, Mr. Harrington is here to see you." Timothy Harrington, CEO of Harrington Global Development, one of the firm's biggest potential clients. Callum had sent them a proposal weeks ago, even before he met Junie and Eliza. "Send him in." Harrington was an imposing man in his 50s, with a firm handshake and a calculated smile. The kind of client Callum had always known how to impress. "Callum, I'll get straight to the point," Harrington said after the initial greetings. "We like your proposal for the complex in Dubai. We want you to lead the project." Dubai, one of the most competitive and lucrative markets in the world. A project like this would be a game changer in any career. Thank you for the confidence, Mr. Harrington. That's excellent news. We need you to be there for at least the initial 3 months, Harrington continued, to personally oversee the start of construction. We want our lead architect on site, interacting with local authorities, adjusting the project as needed. 3 months. The information hung in the air like a heavy cloud. "When would you need me?" Callum asked, his professional voice hiding the sudden tightness in his chest. "Ideally, within 2 weeks. The investors are eager to start. The contract, of course, is extremely generous." Harrington mentioned a figure that made Callum's eyebrows rise. And that's just the beginning. If the project is successful, and I'm sure it will be, there are plans to expand into other international markets. The old Callum would have accepted immediately. He would have seen in that proposal everything he ever wanted: prestige, recognition, professional challenge, financial security. A clear path to the top. "It's an extraordinary proposal," he replied, maintaining his professional composure. "Can I have a day to consider all the details?" Harrington seemed slightly surprised by the hesitation, but nodded. "Certainly, but don't take too long. We have other interested candidates, although you are our first choice." After the executive left, Callum remained seated for long minutes, looking out the window at the city below. An opportunity like this came once in a lifetime, the kind of project that would define a career. His eyes turned to the unfinished model on the side table. He and Junie had started it together the previous week when she came to visit the office again. It was a simple house, but with details that only a child would think to add. A slide coming directly out of a second-floor window, a star-shaped garden, a tree with a tree house in its canopy. Next to the model, taped to the wall, was the drawing Junie had made of him, her and Eliza holding hands. In recent weeks, that drawing had become a kind of anchor, reminding him of what really mattered when he got lost in spreadsheets and architectural plans. He picked up the phone and called Claire. "Could you bring me my calendar, please? I need to check my commitments for the next few weeks." As he waited, his mind wandered to the previous Wednesday. He had helped Junie with a task Eliza had prepared for her, identifying letters in a story. The concentration on her small face as she tried to recognize each symbol, the joy when she got it right, the way she looked at him for approval. Claire entered with the calendar, interrupting his thoughts. "Thank you, Claire. Could you close the door on your way out, please?" Alone again, Callum flipped through the pages. He noticed how his commitments had changed in recent months. Before it was just meetings, presentations, business dinners. Now there were notes like, "Bring book for Junie" or "Buy material to fix shelf." Little anchors in time, little reminders of a life that had become much more than work. 3 months in Dubai would mean 3 months without seeing Junie's smile as she opened the door. Without the evening conversations with Eliza on the porch. Without the simple dinners that were now the best part of his weeks. More importantly, it would be breaking the promise he had made to both of them, not to leave, to be consistent, present. Callum closed the calendar. He looked again at the model and the drawing. Something solidified inside him, a calm certainty that replaced the previous agitation. "I've built a lot of things," he muttered to himself, "but now I'm building something that's worth more." He picked up the phone and called the number Harrington had left. "Mr. Harrington, Callum Reeve. I sincerely appreciate the offer, but I must decline. I have commitments here that I cannot postpone or transfer." He heard the surprise in the voice on the other end, the attempts at persuasion, the offer of an even higher amount. He remained firm, polite but unshakable. When he hung up, he felt a strange sensation. Not the regret he expected, but a deep relief. As if he had finally been freed from a weight he didn't even know he was carrying. He looked at the clock. There was still time to stop by Eliza and Junie's house before it got dark. Maybe he'd bring pizza for dinner. He put away his papers, grabbed his coat and left, stopping only to tell Claire he would be out for the rest of the day. He wouldn't tell them about the proposal he had turned down. It wasn't to receive gratitude or recognition. It was simply the right choice, the only one possible given who he had become. A quiet choice, without fanfare or drama, but a choice that changed everything. Nearly 2 months had passed since Callum turned down the project in Dubai. He never mentioned the opportunity to Eliza or Junie, but something had shifted within him since that decision. A quiet certainty, a renewed commitment. Fall was giving way to winter. The trees were losing their last leaves, and the mornings dawned with a low fog. On one of these Saturday mornings, Callum and Eliza were sitting in the small kitchen, drinking coffee while Junie was still asleep. These moments alone had become precious to both of them, a space for adult conversation, without Junie's vibrant energy filling every corner. Eliza seemed particularly tired that morning. She had worked a double shift at the diner the day before. "The manager quit," she commented, rubbing her temple. "Now I have to cover more hours until they find someone." Callum noticed the dark circles under her eyes, her hands slightly trembling from exhaustion. "Do you like working there?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Eliza shrugged. "It pays the bills. The co-workers are nice, mostly, and the hours allow me to be with Junie for part of the day." It wasn't an answer about liking it, Callum noted. It was about surviving, about priorities. "What if there was an alternative?" he asked, the words coming out before he could overthink them. Eliza looked up from her cup. "What kind of alternative?" Callum took a deep breath. He had thought about this for weeks, weighed the pros and cons, making sure it wouldn't be just a gesture of charity, but a solid professional decision. "There's an opening for an administrative assistant at my office," he said finally, keeping his voice casual, though his heart was beating faster. "Fair hours, stable salary?" He paused, watching her reaction. "And I know you can grow." Eliza froze, her cup halfway to her mouth. Slowly, she put it back on the saucer. "At your office," she repeated, as if testing the words. "Claire, my current assistant, is leaving. She's getting married and moving out of town," Callum explained. "We're looking for someone to replace her. Someone organized, responsible, who learns quickly." "And you thought of me," Eliza said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I thought of you." A silence settled between them. Eliza looked out the window at the grey, early winter sky. Callum could almost see the thoughts racing behind those eyes. "Why?" she asked finally, turning back to face him. It was a simple question, but it carried a lot of weight. "Why her? Why now? Why what?" "Because you're capable," Callum answered sincerely. "Because I've seen how you manage this house, how you organize everything with limited resources, how you teach Junie. You have skills that are valuable in an office." Eliza bit her lip, considering. "What about Junie?" "My schedule at the diner lets me be with her in the mornings. The office hours are more predictable, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, weekends free." Callum paused. "And there's a school 2 blocks from the office. A good school. Junie could start there." Eliza's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the school. Callum knew how much that meant to her, the promise she so badly wanted to keep. "What about the salary?" she asked, still hesitant. Callum mentioned a figure that was almost double what she earned at the diner. He saw the surprise flash across her face, quickly replaced by something more complex. A mix of hope and suspicion. Eliza took a deep breath, placing her hands on the table. I don't want it to seem like I'm accepting out of pity." There was pride in her voice, but not arrogance. Just the dignity of a woman who had fought on her own for so long, who didn't want to be seen as a charity case. Callum reached out, covering her hand for a brief moment. "Eliza." "How you deserve it," he said, simply and directly. "I'm just opening the door." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding, a mutual respect that had grown slowly over the months. "You'll have to do a formal interview, of course," Callum added, withdrawing his hand, "to keep up appearances at the office. But I know your worth." Eliza was silent for a long moment, as if weighing not just the offer, but all the changes it would bring. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I accept," she said, her voice gaining firmness with each word. "And I'll do more than you expect." There was no excessive gratitude in her tone, no submission, just a woman accepting an opportunity she deserved, with the clear intention of making the most of it. The following Monday, Eliza walked into Callum's office for her formal interview, wearing the best outfit she owned, a grey skirt and a simple white blouse, but impeccably ironed. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and there was a determination in her eyes that impressed even the most skeptical partners. She answered the questions with clarity and intelligence. When asked about her lack of office experience, she spoke of her organizational skills, her ability to learn quickly, her attention to detail. "I raised a daughter on my own while working irregular hours," she said, looking directly at the interview committee. "I know how to manage time, resources, and priorities, and I'm ready to learn what I don't know yet." She was hired the same day. In the following weeks, Eliza flourished in the new environment. She quickly learned the office systems, the organization of projects, the names of key clients. She arrived early, left on time, and every day seemed more confident. Junie started at the nearby school, entering with a mix of nervousness and excitement. Every morning, Eliza would drop her off at the classroom door before heading to the office, just a few blocks away. The most noticeable change, however, was not in the new job or Junie's school. It was in Eliza's posture, in the way she now walked through the office corridors, upright, confident, focused, no longer like someone just surviving day to day, but like someone actively building her own path. With dignity, in a month, she had already reorganized the digital filing system. In 2 cells, she presented a suggestion to improve the workflow between departments that was immediately adopted. She was no longer just the single mother struggling to pay the bills. She was Eliza Thomas, an efficient administrative assistant, respected by her colleagues, with a future of possibilities ahead of her. One afternoon, while organizing a meeting, she paused briefly as she passed Callum's office. Through the half-open door, she saw him working on a blueprint, focused. "Thank you," she murmured softly, just to herself. Then she straightened her shoulders and moved on, walking with firm steps down the hallway. She had work to do, a future to build, a daughter to inspire. And for the first time in many years, she had every reason to believe she could achieve it all. Eliza's first paycheck arrived on a Thursday. She opened it in the kitchen after Junie had gone to bed. Callum was with her, helping to fix one of the chairs that had started to wobble. When she saw the amount, her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't a fortune, but it was stable, predictable, enough. More than she had managed in years of working at the diner. "Now I can do it," she said, almost in a whisper. "Do what?" Callum asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Enroll Junie in school. For real. Not just for a few hours, but full-time. With a uniform, supplies, everything." She ran her fingers over the paper, as if to make sure it was real. There was a mix of pride and nervousness in her voice, an old promise about to be fulfilled. The next morning, Eliza took a few hours off and went to the school near the office. She came back with forms, supply lists, and a glow in her eyes that Callum had never seen before. "She starts on Monday," she announced, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "First grade." The principal said that even though she's starting mid-term, Junie seems well prepared thanks to the homeschooling. The pride in her voice was palpable. Not just pride for Junie, but also for herself, for having managed against all odds, to give her daughter a solid foundation, even in the most difficult circumstances. The weekend was a flurry of shopping: school uniform, notebooks, pencils, erasers. Eliza checked each item off the list with the precision of someone who doesn't want to leave anything behind. She bought everything with her own money, insisting on it, although Callum had offered to help. "This is something I need to do," she explained. "With my job, my salary, it's important to me." Callum understood. It wasn't about the money itself, but about the dignity of fulfilling her own promise with her own means. Junie, for her part, seemed to grow with each new acquisition. She tried on the uniform with reverence, admiring herself in the mirror. She organized her new pencils by color, lining them up perfectly on the table. She wrote her name in the new notebook with as much care as her small fingers would allow. On Sunday evening, the eve of the big day, Callum showed up with a package wrapped in colorful paper with stars and moons. "For Junie," he said, handing it to Eliza. "For tomorrow." Eliza looked at it curiously, but didn't open it. She called her daughter, who was finishing organizing her school supplies on the living room table. "Feel like Cal brought something for you." Junie came running, her curls bouncing, her eyes shining with anticipation. Callum handed her the package, which she opened carefully, trying not to tear the colorful paper. It was a backpack, not just any backpack, but a special one with drawings of stars and planets on a deep blue background. On the back, embroidered in silver thread, was her name, Junie. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed, hugging the backpack to her chest. Then she noticed there was something inside. She opened the main zipper and found a professional set of colored pencils, much better than the previous one, and a high-quality sketchbook. Between the pages of the sketchbook, hidden like a special secret, was a note written in Callum's elegant handwriting. "Draw your world, in all the colors you want." Junie looked at the note, at the pencils, at the backpack, and then at Callum. Her big eyes filled with tears, a rare sight for a child usually so cheerful. "Thank you, Cal," she said, her voice small but sincere. "I never thought this day would come." Callum felt a lump in his throat. That sentence, coming from a child of only 5, carried so much weight, so much history. It showed that, even so young, she understood her mother's sacrifice and struggle, the hardships they had faced together. Eliza, watching the scene from the kitchen doorway, had a hand over her mouth trying to contain her emotion. Her eyes met Callum's over Junie's head, conveying a gratitude that went beyond words. That night, Junie could hardly sleep from so much anticipation. Eliza had to read 3 stories instead of the usual one, and even then the girl remained restless, asking questions about what school would be like, if the teacher would be nice, if there would be recess. "What if nobody likes me?" she finally asked, revealing the fear hidden behind the excitement. "Impossible not to like you," Eliza replied, kissing her forehead. You're the easiest person to love in the world." The next morning, the 3 of them left the house together. Eliza had prepared a special breakfast, pancakes with chocolate syrup, Junie's favorite. The girl wore her new uniform, the backpack firmly on her shoulders, looking simultaneously smaller and more grown up. The drive to school was filled with Junie's excited voice, asking questions about what it would be like, if there would be other kids to draw with, if the teacher would let her use all the colored pencils at once. Eliza answered patiently, hiding her own nervousness. Callum drove in silence, watching the 2 of them in the rearview mirror. There was something profoundly right about that moment, as if the pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. When they arrived, they saw other families dropping off their children, hurried mothers checking backpacks, fathers taking first-day pictures, children oscillating between excitement and apprehension. A daily scene for many, but an extraordinary one for them. "I'm scared," Junie confessed quietly, holding both Eliza's and Callum's hands as they walked to the school's colorful gate. "It's normal to be scared of new things," Callum said, crouching down to her level. "But remember, you're already amazing. You're just going to show that to more people now." The teacher was waiting at the classroom door, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile and patient eyes. She greeted Junie warmly, commenting on the beautiful, starry backpack. "Time to go in," the teacher said softly. "I have a special spot saved for you." Junie looked at Eliza, at Callum, then back at the room full of unknown children. Everything will be fine, Eliza assured her, tucking a rebellious strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. We'll be here at pickup, both of us. Callum nodded in confirmation. That we wouldn't miss it for anything. Junie took a deep breath, as if gathering all the courage of her 5 years, and walked into the classroom. At the door, she turned one last time and waved. Then she disappeared into the new world that awaited her. Eliza stood still, looking at the closed door, a mixture of pride and apprehension on her face. "Fears she'll be fine," Callum said, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I know," Eliza replied, discreetly wiping away a tear. "It's just so many times I thought this day would never come, that I would never be able to give this to her." On the way to the office, Eliza was quieter than usual. She looked out the window, lost in thought. "And what are you thinking about?" Callum finally asked. "About how everything has changed," she replied, "in such a short time, as if life has finally given us a chance." Callum wanted to say it wasn't life, it was her persistence, her strength, her dignity. But he knew Eliza wouldn't take direct compliments well, so he just smiled and said, "You deserved this chance. More than anyone I know." The day at the office was long. Eliza checked the clock constantly, anxious for the moment to pick up Junie. Callum met her at the end of the day, and together they went to the school, talking about how the first day might have been. What if she hated it? What if it was too hard? What if the other kids? Eliza verbalized her fears, the same as any mother on her child's first day of school. "She's strong and smart, like her mother," Callum replied simply. Dozens of children were pouring out of the school doors, carrying backpacks and stories from their first day. Eliza stood on her tiptoes, searching for the familiar curls in the crowd. And then there she was, Junie, running towards them, the starry backpack bouncing on her small back, her face lit up by the biggest smile they had ever seen. "Mommy, Cal!" she shouted, throwing herself into Eliza's arms. It was amazing. School is amazing. On the way home, Junie didn't stop talking. She told them about the kind teacher who had read a story about dragons, about the desks arranged in groups of 4, about the classroom library with so many books she could hardly believe it. "And I made friends," she exclaimed, the words tumbling out in her excitement. "Lily invited me to sit with her, and Pedro lent me his eraser when mine fell. And the teacher loved my drawing. She said I have a lot of talent." Eliza and Callum exchanged looks of relief and joy in the rearview mirror. All the morning's worries had vanished. When they got home, Junie continued her excited narrative, while Eliza prepared a special celebratory snack, cookies and chocolate milk. Callum watched, feeling part of that joy in a way he had never experienced before. "You know," Junie said suddenly, with a comical seriousness on her little face, "I made a lot of friends today, but my best friend is still Cal." Callum's heart filled with an emotion he couldn't name. It was belonging, the feeling of finally being part of something bigger than himself. After the snack, Junie asked to go to the backyard to show them something. The 3 of them went out into the fresh, late afternoon air. There, on the worn wooden table, was the model they had started in Callum's office, now completely finished. "I worked on it over the weekend," Junie explained proudly. "I wanted to finish it before I started school." The model had evolved. What had started as a simple house now had a detailed garden, small figures in the yard, windows with tiny curtains, even a paper dog next to the door. "It's our house," Junie said simply. "Not this one, but the one we'll have one day. All of us." The statement, made with the innocent confidence of childhood, hung between them like a promise, a glimpse of a future that, until recently, none of them would have dared to imagine. The 3 of them looked at the small creation in silence. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the modest backyard. Junie sat next to Callum, leaning against his arm. Eliza, on the other side, discreetly held his hand. Callum felt all the weight and all the lightness of that moment. He took a deep breath, searching for words to express what he felt. "Before I met you," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I was a lonely person." Junie looked at him with her big, attentive eyes. Eliza squeezed his hand lightly, encouraging him to continue. "I didn't believe in friendships," he went on, or in real connections. I thought I was better off alone. The backyard was quiet, just the distant sound of birds and the gentle wind in the leaves. "But you, Junie, you made me see life differently," he said, looking at the girl who had changed everything. "Die with your honesty, your way of seeing beauty in everything." Then he looked at Eliza, whose eyes were already shining with unshed tears. "And now I know that a home is where you are loved. It doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter the place, it's about the people, not the walls." It was the simplest and most profound truth he had ever discovered. He who had spent his life designing physical structures finally understood what truly made a home. Junie, with the innocent wisdom of children, smiled and said, "And you're part of our family. You always were." There were no grand promises in that moment, no dramatic declarations or elaborate plans for the future. Just three people, sitting in a simple backyard at dusk, acknowledging the bond they had built day after day, moment after moment. It was real. It was possible. It was enough. Later, when Junie was already asleep, exhausted after her big day, Eliza and Callum sat on the front porch, as they had on so many nights. "She's right, you know," Eliza said softly. "About you being family." Callum looked at her, at the face that had become so familiar and dear. "It's the only place I want to be," he replied simply. It wasn't an ending, he realized. It was just a beginning. There would be challenges, adjustments, difficult days ahead. Real life didn't follow perfect scripts. But now, for the first time, he wouldn't face those challenges alone. Neither would they. They had built something stronger and more lasting